And I think you alluded on the last show that you might have been doing studies on LSD, but you hadn't done it at that point.
That's right.
I got home that night after being at the Royal Society, where I saw you speak, Amanda Fielding, Graham Hancock was there, Rupert Sheldrake was there. It was a big night. And my 12-year-old always asks me, what's a drug? And when I say what a drug is, she said, well, what's alcohol? And I get into this conversation, and she said to me, why is LSD illegal? And I figured I would ask the source himself, which maybe is you, and maybe that's how we should start this out.
Yes, okay. Great question. I mean, LSD, along with the other psychedelics like psilocybin, which were made illegal on the on the coattails of LSD, they're the only drugs to be made illegal because they were too politically dangerous. So these drugs were banned because they changed the way people viewed the way America was waging its war in Vietnam. And it's a remarkable story, really, because LSD was discovered in 1943, the real effects were discovered. And by the end of the 1940s, the company Sandoz that employed Albert Hofmann, who discovered it, they could see what he saw, that it was a very interesting drug for research. And for about 10 years, there was widespread use. Sandoz gave it away. They made it as a medicine, they gave it away. There were 1,000 clinical papers published. 40,000 patients, I think, were studied. There were conferences, and everyone said, this is a great breakthrough. We're really beginning to understand the brain, and I'll come to this a bit later on, beginning to use LSD to help deal with disorders like depression and alcoholism. And then, as often happens with drugs, it began to move in from the medical fraternity into more recreational use. And the real trigger for that was the war in Vietnam. Because a lot of young men were, when conscription happened, when people were being forced, depending on their birthday, to go and fight in Vietnam, that triggered quite a backlash. And you think about it, you're an 18-year-old American guy, and suddenly, just because you happen to be born on an odd day of the month, you were going to be sent to this place, which you'd never heard of until the war, to fight a war that you didn't understand, to shoot at people you would never see, be blown up or killed by them. And you thought, why am I doing this? And then there was a migration. These guys went to California and went to San Francisco, Haight-Ashbury, started taking LSD, and realized, there was a different way of viewing the world. And that cultural shift away from war that was induced by LSD, that was extremely threatening to the American way of life, because up till that point, America was about ruling the world, being big enough, powerful enough to keep communism at bay and use a military approach to control things. And people were saying, we don't want to do that, actually. There was this famous, wonderful protest placard, drop acid, not bombs. And that was anathema to the American way, which was, drop bombs and keep dropping bombs. And so the drug had to be banned because it was seen as it was going to undermine the whole political strategy of the States. And amazing, in those days, as sort of is the case today, but less so, you couldn't ban a drug just because you didn't like it, because it changed people's political stance. You had to find some harms. So there was this wonderful collusion between the drug enforcement people, the CIA, and the newspaper editors, or things like the National Enquirer. These scurrilous magazines, that are even worse than the British newspapers. And they concocted this range of absurd stories, claiming LSD was the most dangerous thing. Famous one, girl gives birth to a frog after taking LSD. Absurd.
You put these headlines up at the event.
I did.
And yeah.
And they're outrageous. And everyone, I think everyone knew they were lies. But politicians could say, well, look, if newspaper editors are concerned and they're responsible people, we should be concerned. So there's a concern about the drug, so we will ban it. But the most staggering thing of all was that it was banned despite opposition from senior politicians. Bobby Kennedy, Secretary of State, unquestionably the most powerful intellectually powerful man, probably the most powerful man in America, would have been president if he hadn't been assassinated. He says to he's the boss, and he says to these drug enforcement administrators, sorry, 6 months ago this drug was a wonderful invention and it was helping us understand depression. Now you're telling us it's a dangerous drug and we're going to make it illegal. Excuse me, what's happened? What's the evidence? And of course they wouldn't answer. They just kept prevaricating and trying to say, you know, to sort of get him off the topic. And in the end he got angry. He said, look, I think you're wrong. I think that LSD used properly, you know, in medical hands, could be a wonderful, advance. It could be very helpful. But even he could not stop it. And of course what they did, they said, oh, well, look, we're only stopping recreational use. We're not stopping scientists using it or doctors using it. But they did. In fact, since LSD was banned in America in 1967, there has never been a study on LSD in America. Even though apparently you can, but no one has ever managed to work their way through this Kafkaesque network of blind alleys through the regulations to do it. So that proves it's been, de facto a ban, even if theoretically you can work with it.
So 50 years, there's been no studies since.
50 years in America. In fact, there have been only really 3-4 studies of LSD, and they've all come in the last couple of years. And 2 of them have been ours. Because it seemed to me, isn't that outrageous? Something that was shown to be really promising as a treatment, as a way of exploring the brain, as a way of even modelling some brain disorders. It could have opened up real new avenues of insight and research. Gets banned simply because it's not, it's changing the way people vote.
Continue watching this fascinating conversation for free by clicking on the link below to visit our website, learn from the best minds in the world, and connect with a community of passionate people building the best versions of themselves. Just click on the link below, and I'll see you on the inside.